Hello! Well, that was nice, wasn't it? It's now chucking it down with rain, so I thought I'd record another little video. Hoping the rain will stop. Typical Welsh weather, from sun to rain and, you know, everything else in between. Last week we were talking about the arterial supply to the upper limb, so I thought, hey, the obvious thing to talk about this week would be the arterial supply to the lower limb, right? So we're going to start off with this guy. Like we did last time, we started with the aorta and followed the arteries all the way out to the hand. We'll start with the aorta here, and then we'll mostly work our way through the lower limb, right? And we'll see a lot of the same sort of themes that we were talking about in the upper limb being played out again in the lower limb, but we'll follow the arteries down. Okay, let's have a look at you then. I picked this model because hopefully it's going to be fairly easy to take apart. I'm still going to take all this out. Okay, so we're taking out the GI tract. We go. Oh, the aorta stops. That's no good, is it? Right, I'll get a different model then. Alright. Let's try this one. Take out the GI tract and ta-da, that's better. So this is what we came for, right? Here's the aorta. Right, so we're descending within the abdomen, really, really deep. There's the aorta. We're at the level here. There's the inferior mesenteric artery. These are the gonadal arteries coming out of it here. And the aorta ends by splitting into the two common iliac arteries. So we have a left and right common iliac artery. If we were to follow the left common iliac artery, we see it dividing again. You see that? So we see an internal iliac artery which goes into the pelvis and is going to supply blood to most of the viscera of the pelvis, and then we have an external iliac artery running out here, and we can see this is a psoas major, and iliopsoas is forming, so it's lying on top of psoas major. So that's the external iliac artery, and that's running down towards the lower limb, so that's what we're going to follow. Remember, there is no iliac artery. There are common iliac arteries and external iliac arteries and internal iliac arteries, but there isn't an iliac artery on its own. Always use the correct terminology. So, alright, moving on from this one then. Okay, so now we want to look at the upper limb. We can see there's the common iliac artery there, and there's the internal iliac artery going into the pelvis here, and there's the external iliac artery here. Okay, so now, do you remember this? So this here is the inguinal ligament, and when we were looking at the upper limb, we saw how the major artery, as it passed through the shoulder and through the axilla and into the upper limb, we changed its name a number of times, and the same thing happens in the lower limb. So this external iliac artery, when it goes beneath the inguinal ligament here, we change its name and it becomes the femoral artery because it's moving into the thigh, so femoral of the thigh. So this now becomes the artery of the thigh. So it's the same blood vessel, look, but it's just changing its name from external iliac artery to femoral artery. And the femoral artery then is moving into the anterior compartment of the thigh. Do you remember how we've got an anterior compartment with quadriceps in it and a medial compartment with the adductors in it, and we have a posterior compartment with the hamstrings in it, right? So go and have a look at the muscles of the hip and the lower limb, but these muscles are grouped together and they're kept in separate compartments by connective tissue. So this sometimes gets called the common femoral artery, but the femoral artery moves into the anterior compartment. Let's dissect away some of these muscles, see if we can see where it goes. So this is sartorius, cutting across here. Let's take sartorius off. How'd you come? Now we can see a lot more. So this artery then is running deep to sartorius. It's running in this subsartorial canal. And we can see that it's running with a vein and a nerve. So that's the femoral vein and the femoral nerve that it's running with. But can you see how it's it's not just descending through the anterior compartment, but it's running around here medially towards the adductor compartment, towards the medial compartment. And it gives off a deep branch. Oh, we can see that up here. So these are the deep branches of the femoral artery here. Profunda femoris, so these are going into the muscle mass, and they're going to supply blood to the femur and to the quadriceps femoris muscle groups and all the other muscles in here. If we were to take away, there we go, we can see some more branches if we take off rectus femoris here. But if we keep following our main target, the femoral artery, what it's trying to do is trying to get into the it's trying to get into the back of the knee, into the popliteal fossa. So to do that, it needs to get through the adductor muscles. Now what can we see? So we've got a whole bunch of adductor muscles. We've got a gracilis, an adductor longus, an adductor magnus, and all sorts, and they're coming together here, and they're meeting. This is there's the big toe here, so this is the medial side of the knee. They're coming together to meet semimembranosus and semitendinosus, the medial hamstring muscles around here. So we can't see too much on this model, it's getting messy, but it's getting covered up by muscle bulk. But what we find if we look in that adductor group is there's an adductor hiatus. There's a gap in the muscular attachment of the adductors to the femur, and the femoral artery goes through that adductor hiatus, through that gap as it winds around, and in doing so, that's what enables it to get to the popliteal region, to the popliteal fossa. So when it passes through the adductor hiatus, the femoral artery changes its name and it becomes the popliteal artery. So from the femoral artery up here, there are lateral and medial circumflex femoral arteries, and those loop around the femur, and there are also circumflex arteries coming from the external iliac artery up on the other side of the hip, and we see these blood vessels, branches of these blood vessels meeting and anastomosing. So we have these anastomoses across the joint. So this is another example of collateral circulation in the limb. Just as we see in the upper limb, we see collateral circulation around each joint. So around the hip, what this means is that if this artery was to get occluded for whatever reason, there's an alternate route to which blood can flow around the joint to continue to get into the limb, so the tissues of the limb won't become ischemic. Common theme throughout the limbs are all the joints, as we see as we go down. So at the knee, we can see some blood vessels here superficially. We also see a whole bunch of branches. So if we think about it, we've got this single popliteal artery descending through the popliteal region, passing through the knee, and it sends off a whole bunch of branches to supply the structures of the knee and also to set up potential collateral circulations. There are anastomoses. So the Latin word for knee is genu, which has come up before in my videos. We see knee-shaped things, they get called geniculate, right? Or genu something or other. So these arteries at the knee, these branches of the popliteal artery, get called geniculate arteries. We have lateral superior, lateral inferior, medial superior, medial inferior, and medial geniculate arteries. And look, we can see these. Okay, so let's take off a bit more. I'm going to have to take off the hamstrings. There we go. Now you can see here, look, there's the femoral artery passing through that adductor hiatus, that gap in the adductor muscles. So we change its name now and we're going to call it the popliteal artery. Popliteal artery is descending through the popliteal fossa, and look, we can see some branches coming off here, and these are some of the geniculate arteries. Like I say, there are a lot more than you can see on this model. So again, we have superior and inferior, medial and lateral, so that's 4 plus another medial or middle geniculate artery. So these occur proximal and distal to the knee joint, or you might say superior and inferior to the knee joint, and they interconnect with anastomoses. So there's another potential route for collateral circulation to set up if the popliteal artery gets occluded. And if you think about it, just by keeping the knee flexed for a long period of time, that might be enough for blood to flow through the collateral circulation to get to the distal limb, just because the popliteal artery is going to get compressed somewhat easily then, maybe. So the popliteal artery passes through the popliteal fossa, so we're descending down, and don't forget we call this the thigh between the hip and the knee, and then distal to the knee we call that the leg. So we're descending into the leg, or we're descending into the calf, you might say, and this is gastrocnemius. We take off gastrocnemius. Now what we should see, oh look, we can see some more genicular branches here. What we should see is the popliteal artery ends because it splits. So it becomes the posterior tibial artery, but it also gives off an anterior tibial artery. So what we see here, running down the calf, so remember this is deep to gastrocnemius and soleus because I've taken those guys off, so the artery is quite deep now. This is the posterior tibial artery here. So if this is the posterior tibial artery, the anterior tibial artery needs to get to the anterior compartment. So again, in the calf we have a number of compartments. We have this posterior compartment and an anterior compartment, and they're separated by the tibia and the fibula, and in between the tibia and the fibula there's a membrane, an interosseous membrane, just like we see in the forearm. Interosseous, so yeah, it's a connective tissue sheet in between the two bones, so an interosseous membrane. So this means that the anterior tibial artery has to pass through the interosseous membrane to get to the anterior compartment. Now we can't see that happening there, it'll be going through there somewhere. So if we turn this around, what can we see? Right, if we dissect away these muscles a bit, there we go. Yeah, there it is. So there's the anterior tibial artery there. So it's passed through, and we can see there. So there's the fibula. This is lateral, right? There's the little toe. There's the big toe. There's the little toe. So this is lateral. This is medial. So this is the fibula around here. This is the tibia, and you can see, look, there's that interosseous membrane in between the two. So the anterior tibial artery has passed through the interosseous membrane, and look, it's running down on the interosseous membrane anteriorly to supply blood to the anterior compartment muscles and structures of the leg. There's another artery as well, there's a fibular artery. So the posterior tibial artery gives off a fibular branch, which runs down with the fibula, supplying blood to the bone itself and to other structures nearby. So I'm not entirely sure what that would be up here on this model, but we can see it just down here. There's the fibular artery there. And around so if this is the head of the fibula, around the neck of the fibula, we'd also expect to see another circumflex fibular artery surrounding it up there. And that also may well have connections with the other branches around the knee up here. There might be other anastomoses. Okay, so if we follow the posterior tibial artery, let me get rid of this. There's the big toe there, right? So this is medial. So there's the posterior tibial artery, and look, it's running medially, and it's going to run into the, what's going to fall off this, anything? It's going to run into the foot, and I'll grab a foot model to look at that in more detail. But we've got these two bony bits here, right? So if I turn it around, so look, there's the big toe, there's the little toe. We've got these two bony bits, and these two bony bits are things you can palpate. These are the malleoli. Remember, the fibula is lateral, so this is the lateral malleolus of the fibula, and this is the medial malleolus of the tibia, and the posterior tibial artery is going to run around the medial malleolus to get into the foot, and the fibular artery is in there, and that's running around the lateral malleolus, right? Whereas if we look anteriorly, well, there's the anterior tibial artery, and as it descends, it's going into the dorsum of the foot. So this is the dorsal surface, this is the plantar surface that you stand on. So the anterior tibial artery is actually going to become the dorsalis pedis, which is kind of hidden here, but it's about there. Right, let's swap to the foot model at this point. All right, now, oh, that's nice, look. There's the posterior tibial artery. There's the big toe. So this is medial, this is the medial malleolus. And look how the posterior tibial artery is curling around to get into the foot. So it's the posterior tibial artery then that's going to supply blood to the plantar foot. And I'm going to have to dissect quite a lot here. There's a lot of layers on this model. Yeah. Okay, that's not too bad. So you can see here, there's the big toe. Right, there's the big toes. This is medial. So the posterior tibial artery ends as the medial plantar artery and the lateral plantar artery. And these guys go into the foot. If I, whoop, I'm going to take that off. I'm going to take that off. Alright, so I'm just going to take this layer away. Well, there's another layer of muscle there. I'm going to take, oh, I've got to take that off, got to take that off. What I'm getting down to is another, look, another arch, another arterial arcade here. So essentially the deep, the lateral and medial plantar arteries and the deep plantar artery, they're coming together to form a deep plantar arch. As we saw in the hand, we saw superficial and deep superficial and deep palmar arches in the hand, didn't we? There's a plantar arch here. Now, I read that there is sometimes superficial and deep plantar arches. Sometimes there's just a single plantar arch and it just gets called the plantar arch, and sometimes it gets called the deep plantar arch. So watch out for that. And then this plantar arch is giving off a whole bunch of metatarsal and digital branches to supply the toes and the metatarsals and stuff like that, right? So that's how the posterior tibial artery ends. Flip it over and, oh, I've got so many bits. Right, so here is the anterior tibial artery here. Where the anterior tibial artery passes between the two malleoli, we change its name to, as I said, dorsalis pedis. And this is where you can feel the pulse. We'll talk about pulses in a moment. But dorsalis pedis passes down here, oh that's cool, and it gives off, look, this artery here. Can you see that? That's disappearing down through a hole. So that's running between the metatarsals, the first and second metatarsal. And that is the deep plantar artery that I was on about. So that dives down through the foot to join with this arch. So this arch is actually supplied with blood by the lateral and medial plantar arteries and dorsalis pedis. So it's receiving blood from both the anterior and the posterior tibial arteries. Cool, huh? So there are clear anastomoses across the ankle and across the foot as well, right? The fibular artery ends by giving off, we can just about see it in there if I take this off. There's the fibular artery in there. So that's the lateral malleolus there. It ends by giving off, look, there's a calcaneal branch back here and malleolar branches. So the fibular artery, which is appearing here then, so it's giving off this branch to the calcaneal bones, this calcaneal branch is giving off this lateral malleolar branch, but look, it's got to pass through the interosseous membrane to get out here. Now something we can't see on here is deep to these muscles, there's another arcade, or kind of dorsalis pedis. Once it gives off this deep plantar artery here, it also, well, you see it also gives off these other branches to the toes, but it continues around like this, right? Doesn't go all the way around here, just imagine a short bit, right, like that. And that would be the arcuate artery. So we've got another arch on this side as well, kind of. And sometimes this also anastomoses with branches from the fibular artery, and sometimes it doesn't, it just gives off a whole bunch of branches and ends. So if we could see it underneath those muscles, we might find the arcuate artery curving around like that. So it does get a lot more complicated when you get down to the foot and the ankle, but the lower limb otherwise is fairly straightforward. When you get down to the foot and the ankle, if you know the names of the bones of the foot and the ankle, then the arteries nearby are much easier to name and recognise, right? They follow the name of the bones basically to learn the bones of the foot. Now, there are a number of places in the lower limb where you would like to be able to palpate the pulse to assess blood flow to the lower limb. So we need to have a look and see where these arteries are superficial so you can palpate them. So let me put this back together. All right, let's put sartorius back on. What can we palpate? Well, superior to the inguinal ligament, we're covered in abdominal musculature here, aren't we? So it might be difficult to palpate that, but here, this looks pretty superficial. So here, just inferior to the inguinal ligament, you should be able to palpate your femoral pulse. You might want to try that now, unless you're in public somewhere, in which case, keep your hands out your trousers. But that's the femoral pulse there. And then, of course, it's deep to muscle until we turn around to the popliteal fossa. But this is again superficial, so you should be able to find a popliteal pulse in there. You might want to try to find that if you've got shorts on or a skirt. There's the popliteal pulse, and then the muscles are deep again. The arteries are deep to muscles again, aren't they? Until we get down towards the ankle, and then down here. So we find. There's the big toe. So find the medial malleolus, and then here you should be able to palpate the pulse of the posterior tibial artery. Try that. And then on the dorsum of the foot, this muscle is pretty thin here. You should be able to find around here somewhere the pulse of the dorsalis pedis artery. So you can then work your way through the lower limb and assess the blood supply to the lower limb by palpating the pulse. All right? Okay, there you go. The arterial supply to the lower limb. Again, we're following a single artery largely that's changing its name as we go through the limb. We find lots of branches at the joints and anastomoses, so the potential for a collateral circulation around the hip joint, the knee joint and the ankle joint, just as we see in the upper limb. And then as we get into the foot, we also see those arteries often linking up. And the blood supply when we get into the foot gets pretty complicated. The important parts are the medial and lateral plantar arteries and dorsalis pedis, and then some of the other branches that are linking things up. All right, well done, ticked. See you next time.